Good morning for those of you who are joining us live, that is. We are going to start in about 2 minutes. Wanted to let you in, get you settled, and make sure that you can hear me and you can see the slide deck on our screen. So hopefully all of that is working properly. Again, we'll start in about 2 minutes.
I can hear you today.
Excellent. Always encouraging on a Monday.
Yeah.
All good here. I can hear you.
Good. And as far as seeing the slide, at least the cover page of that slide deck, I'm getting the nod. That's great. Technology is a fickle mistress. I'm glad it's working properly for us so far this morning.
I can hear you, Judy Stockton.
Excellent. Well, welcome and thank you. Well, we've arrived at the 10 o'clock hour. Good morning again to those of you joining us live, and we'll say hello to those of you who are watching this recording at your leisure. My name is Seth Stander. I'm the Community Aging Specialist for HHCI CARES, which is part of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute. CARES stands for Caregiving, Aging, Resilience, Ethics, and Spirituality. Now, HHCI CARES is directed by Dr. Peggy Dettermeyer. She undertakes a certain amount of programming throughout the year, and I undertake a certain amount of programming throughout the year, and it's my pleasure to teach the Aging with Grace series. For our spring season, we are in the second half of our programming. We've entered today the third of our 4 Aging with Grace sessions, where we will focus today on understanding living options. Next Monday, we will go ahead and address paying for aging as our final topic. Now, all of these sessions are being recorded, and said recordings, along with the slides, will be made available to each of you. We want to make sure that you not only have the information for yourselves, but that you feel comfortable going ahead and sharing the recording, the slides. You can also see recordings of current and previous programs on our website, hhci.org. We encourage spreading freely whatever information you would like to share with others. We are doing this as part of our mission here at HHCI CARES to serve our growing aging population and the growing population of caregivers who attend to them. In addition to community education, Peggy and I offer consulting with special emphases on the hopes and challenges of aging, bioethics, on the hopes and challenges of caregiving, and on navigating the journey of grief. Now, the Hope and Healing Center, a nonprofit which is located on the campus of St. Martin's Episcopal Church here in Houston, is dedicated to meeting the psychosocial and emotional needs of the entire community. And thanks to some very generous underwriting and support from the community, we are grateful to offer our programming to you at no cost for the participants. So, let's get into what I hope will prove to be a useful deck of information today. Living options as we age. They can become, not always, but they can become more complicated, especially if physical and or mental challenges arise. So what can we do to maximize our quality of life, the quality of life for those who we love, for those who may fall into our care? And we're going to focus on that during today's session, the better known options that are available today. Again, I'll refer you to our website, to hhci.org, not only to consult the video library for Aging with Grace videos, but also with related presentations if they are appropriate and useful for you on relocation, on downsizing, and more. And these living options that are listed here on this slide, obviously not an exhaustive list, but they are the topics we're going to spend our time on in this morning's session. Aging in place, independent living, adult daycare options, home care versus home health care, licensed facilities such as assisted living facilities, nursing facilities, memory care units or standalone facilities, and then personal care homes, which depending on bed space may or may not be licensed here in the state of Texas. So with that in mind, let's break these down piece by piece. First and foremost, 80% of folks who have been polled in recent years prefer to remain, if possible, if it's a healthy, safe option, in their own homes. The major considerations obviously have to do with how a person successfully, let alone safely, completes what are known as their activities of daily living, or ADLs. Now, there is a specific clinical list of ADLs, and that clinical list is included in the greater list that I put here on your screen and in the slide deck, which you'll receive after today's presentation. It includes dressing and bathing, meal preparation and eating, ambulating, safely walking, in other words, transferring safely, toileting, other aspects of hygiene, navigating stairs, and very importantly, various safety and emergency responses when one needs to move to another part of or exit one's home. So again, within this is baked in the clinical definitions of ADLs, of activities of daily living. And you may want to refer back to this information again and again as you look to measure for yourself, for those who you know and love, whether or not they are reaching a point where assistance with some or most or all of these ADLs will permit them to remain at home, or if they need to go ahead and consider another viable option. Ideally, you're here today because you're thinking ahead. Some of you may be here today as part of the series already caring for loved ones who find themselves in alternate living settings. And if so, that's wonderful. We're glad you're here so you can continue to reality check the best fit so far for your family members who fall into that category. But we absolutely want you to go ahead and research, and we're going to talk about ways to go ahead and to get eyes on, as well as allies' eyes on, different long-term care options if that turns out to be the healthiest, the safest option for you or for someone you love. In addition to that, We want to encourage, just as we've talked about when in our first program on healthcare rights and responsibilities and our second program on legal considerations, that a discussion with family members about preferences, as well as steps ahead of time to work towards successful implementation, it's crucial to have that communication completed and revised as all parties are able to revise, especially if you reach a point where the person you are responsible for has previously expressed their wishes based on certain scenarios, but can no longer consistently communicate their needs and have delegated that medically and legally to you or others in your family circle or circle of friends, community, and more. So let's go ahead and move into the first a set of options, which all fall under generally the category of independent living. We're talking about for those who are mostly or fully independent. In other words, those activities of daily living do not pose a problem or a serious problem for the routine affairs of life. Some of the names that you may hear thrown around include senior apartments, senior or retirement communities, retirement homes, active senior communities. All of this falls under the umbrella of independent living options, where if you wish to personally engage and pay privately for someone to come in to provide home care, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, that's certainly your prerogative if you feel that you will benefit from it. But the assumption is that it's not needed. It is something that is, if it is brought in, it is brought in as a want, as a matter of convenience, not necessity at this stage of one's life and capacities. And hopefully you will stay at that level for as long as possible. The idea here is that moving into independent living is supposed to improve your quality of life, and therefore hopefully keep your mind and body engaged in a way that extends not just the quantity of days, but also how healthy you are in filling those days. So for example, when we talk about senior apartments, we're talking about communities that are geared for 55 and up. And for those of you who are in your 50s, I don't consider it a senior level either. It's simply older, but this is the terminology that's used. I happen to be 53, going on 54 myself. So I know that technically I'm eligible for this in a relatively short period of time, just like I've been a member, a card-carrying member of AARP for a number of years, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm ready to leave private home living. But if I were to, this would be for someone who, like me, thankfully is independent and self-reliant. Now, there are a few amenities, basic amenities that you can expect, such as limited transportation services, basic housekeeping services, and trash pickup. You will find, and these numbers, I encourage you to take them with a giant tablet of salt, because ultimately the market drives these numbers more than anything else. And as rental units become more available, prices plateau and drop. And as we have a shortage of supply, these could spike and become competitive in pricing above and beyond the numbers that we're using as guidelines today. So just something to keep in mind. If you find yourself looking for a quiet living option where you want to keep to yourself, but also have the opportunity to socialize in a more compact neighborhood, to speak of, a senior apartment option is there, along with others we'll mention in a moment. And by the way, if finances are an issue and you are looking for subsidized or low to sliding scale rent, in the resource tab, you're going to find the Harris County Area Agency on Aging And every county, every territory in the United States has an area agency on aging, in addition to an aging and disability resource center. Ours in Harris County is called Care Connection and is also listed in the resource slide at the end of the presentation. And we also have some foreshadowing for later living options, long-term care ombudsman program, which I will get into much more detail about, and links for that are also in the resource slides. So one option, and paralleling the senior apartment style living that you may find, are the senior living / retirement communities. This is senior apartments beefed up with a broader range of intellectual and physical and social activities, along with, of course, the basic amenities that I described previously. You may very well qualify for subsidy, depending on your monthly income and savings. And this is again where you would want to talk to, whether it's in Harris County or if your home county is elsewhere, your home county's area agency on aging or aging and disability resource center, to find out what subsidy options might be available. Amenities are going to wildly vary based on how modest or extravagant these retirement communities are. Depending on location and amenities, you could pay as little as $27.50 a month. You could end up paying 10 grand a month. It really depends on the style and substance of the amenities, as well as the aesthetics of the community that you are seeking. But obviously, if you are looking for something that is safe but modest, and you need assistance, HUD rental assistance programs may be available, housing choice vouchers, privately owned low rent apartments. These are all things to talk with your area agency on aging about. Now, whether you are in an independent living umbrella, which includes living at home and these various communities that I've just mentioned, you may choose, depending on your preference and or unexpected life circumstance, to engage home care services, or with a prescription, home health care services. Let me make the distinction between these two beyond what you see here on the screen. Home aides focus primarily on such domestic tasks as meal preparation, housekeeping, and may also assist you with transportation. There are agencies out there who go ahead and typically charge by the hour. And if you are working through an agency, you're going to go ahead and you're going to probably pay a bit of a premium for that. Having said that, that agency will be able to find backup personnel for you if the primary person assigned to you is not available or leaves that particular position. You certainly can negotiate something directly that may end up being less expensive, but your backup options, you're completely on your own. So keep that in mind. If that doesn't pose a challenge for you, wonderful, but be aware that that is the primary reason why, if folks elect to use non-healthcare workers, home aides, they're likely going to go through an agency unless they have backup plans for just contracting on their own direct care. Now, home health care is a different animal altogether. We could spend a lot more time on it, but essentially what we're talking about is after an acute health event, you broke a leg or you dislocated a hip, God forbid on either scenario, but using those as common examples. And you have graduated out of hospital care, perhaps short-term rehabilitation, and you are now eligible for a prescription for home health care service, where clinical medical supervision is going to be engaging you at home. And in the scenarios that I talked about, nurses to make sure that you are healing properly from your injuries and physical therapists, if necessary, occupational therapists, to go ahead and to help with that rehabilitation process. Now, ultimately, again, this is something that, if prescribed, Medicare should cover if you need supplemental care beyond what is scheduled from the various members of a home health care agency interdisciplinary team. You can always pay privately, and that is going to depend on, again, how much assistance you need to recover from an acute health care event. Let's talk about not the physical, but the cognitive for a moment. There are adult daycare centers, 2 in particular, here in the greater Houston area, that focus on providing services and supervision for those who are living with usually early to mid-stage dementia. Such locations as the Amazing Place, as Care Partners Dementia Day Center. The more days you go, the greater the likelihood you'll pay a lower daily rate. But I want you to have a general guideline. And on average, you're looking at about 75 and up per day, depending on the progression and therefore the amount of supervision that's going to be needed. Obviously, services, activities, one could also include in here, if inclined, meal plans and so forth. And some of those, by the way, thanks to a wonderful presentation we had, and that should be on our website, from one of the senior personnel at the Amazing Place, Sally Davis, who was our last monthly Lunch and Learn speaker for HHCI CARES, talked about how food preparation and eating a meal is considered an activity because, again, we're talking about stimulation of the senses, not just nutritional needs being met. So that I put under the general umbrella for your consideration, because places like the Amazing Place, like Care Partners Dementia Daycare Center, are looking at holistic care to do whatever is possible until we have the medicine and the technology that can arrest dementia in its various forms, to go ahead and to keep those neural pathways engaged and to promote neuroplasticity as frequently as possible while they have clients in their care. Moving into more intense types of care needs, we enter the realm of long-term care facilities. So we're going to talk first about licensed assisted living facilities. And these are primarily for those who require some assistance with their activities of daily living. There are going to be limits. For example, if you are not capable of, say, transferring with, say, one individual assisting you, and a transfer can mean transfer from your bed to a bedside commode, it can mean from a bed to a wheelchair or a walker, and utilize all the different examples I've just mentioned and put them into their own appropriate scenarios. If you cannot participate in your own transfer and therefore require, say, 2 professionals to assist you, Hoyer lifts or other assisted devices to assist you, then an assisted living facility is likely not the level of care that is appropriate for you. Ultimately, you probably need a nursing facility rather than an assisted living facility. But since we're going to talk about that a little bit later, let's assume that you or your loved one fall into the category of where some assistance with activities of daily living, but not necessarily total assist, which would take you outside of ALF. That's the acronym for assisted living facilities qualification. Remember, ADLs include dressing and bathing, meal preparation and eating, walking, transferring, like I mentioned before, toileting and other types of hygiene, navigating such obstacles as stairs, and a safety/emergency response. Ultimately, there are assisted living facilities that focus on making sure that your ADLs are covered, and with rent and meals starting at $4,000 on average per month, you may find less, and you may certainly find more expensive facilities in and around our county or any county in which assisted living facilities are licensed. There will be additional fees tied to additional levels of assistance. There will likely be entrance fees and deposits that need to be made. Now, in return for that, you will also have access to a variety of activities, to transportation for anything from basic shopping to various medical appointments or other types of appointments in the community. And if you are also looking at, or if you are looking primarily at someone living with cognitive decline, assisted living facilities can focus entirely on memory care, and we'll get to that in a couple of slides. Or they may have the ability to go ahead and to help those whose cognitive decline is at a low to mid-range level without them being put into a secure unit. If it is reaching a mid-level and above, a secure unit may be the safest place for them. And those secure memory care units exist in licensed assisted living facilities and in some licensed nursing facilities. This is a great time, before we continue, to go ahead and to say that you absolutely should look at whatever comparison charts and survey information is available to you online, but there is no substitute for two things in particular. One is an on-site visit, scheduled, and I would also recommend unscheduled, especially since we're past the pandemic emergency period. Again, we're treating the pandemic seriously, but the restrictions on visitation are ending. The ones that were in place starting in March of 2020 have basically reduced down to nil. You might be asked to mask, and if so, please comply. But if otherwise, there should be no impediment to you making an unscheduled as well as scheduled visits to a licensed long-term care facility, and to see what it's like when you are intentionally being taken around on a scheduled tour, and to walk around yourself or with supervision from staff in order to see what the rest of that day might look like, or a different day may look like. That's part one. Part two is to contact your long-term care ombudsman program in your county or territory, because long-term care ombudsman, whether they are professional staff in a county or territorial program, or certified volunteer ombudsman, are visiting those facilities far more frequently than you, and are able to tell you a lot more about what you might want to look for in terms of the strengths and growing edges of a particular facility. And that includes everything from aesthetics to staffing to administration to timeliness of response to call lights to laundry services to quality of food. Is it served? If it's meant to be a hot meal, is it served hot? If there's assistance that's required with eating, one of those activities of daily living, is that service being provided consistently and in a timely fashion? How much does the facility expect you or someone else in your circle of family or friends to help them meet your loved one's needs? All of those are questions that you can bring up with the ombudsman who visits that facility at least quarterly, depending on size, and usually more frequently than that, sometimes monthly or more. Keep that in mind as we look at the next level of long-term care facilities, which is, and I've put skilled in parentheses for a reason. We'll talk about that in a moment, but we're talking about licensed nursing facilities. These are also known as nursing homes. I prefer the term nursing facility, but we are talking about the same thing essentially, where ultimately you are truly in need of the type of care, whether it is assistance with your activities of daily living, whether it is ongoing medication assistance, ongoing therapy assistance that can only be effectively and safely performed under the supervision of or by various professionals and technical personnel. And depending on how much space is available and how much you are able to pay, private or semi-private accommodations are what you can expect. As I mentioned before, just to go to the bottom bullet point for a second, these nursing facilities may very well, like licensed assisted living facilities, have their own units in which secure memory care is being engaged in. Ultimately, you are not going to find nursing facilities in Harris County that are solely devoted to memory care patients or memory care residents, depending on the terminology the facility uses. I prefer residents. This is their home, assumption being that they are there long-term. Unless, and this is the exception, which is why I put skilled in parentheses, they are there after a healthcare event or surgery, an acute healthcare event, in which they may need additional care in the short term, such as physical, occupational, speech therapies, such as wound care, such as intravenous antibiotics, or a combination of the above. I will recommend to you, though, right now, that if you or your loved one are hospitalized or anticipate being hospitalized for a scheduled event, obviously we can't predict an unscheduled emergency, and you are looking to discharge after the acute care event has been resolved up to a certain point in the hospital, I encourage you to talk to case management in that hospital, ideally before you even enter it, about long-term acute care hospitals and inpatient rehabilitation facilities. Why? Because these types of facilities, assuming that you can either afford them out of pocket or they are covered as part of your health benefit, whether it's Medicare, private, or otherwise, are going to have better staffing ratios for your daily needs, as well as equal staffing ratios for such things as physical, occupational, speech therapy, wound care, and so forth. The other piece may be that being in a nursing facility receiving skilled care, you may, depending on your situation or your loved one's situation, there may be quite a disparity in terms of the average age. And so isolation becomes a factor. I encourage you strongly to go ahead and to talk to case management in a hospital about inpatient rehabilitation facilities, long-term acute care hospitals. They exist in communities, large and small. If you must go into a nursing facility for short-term care, just like you would go ahead and take a tour, scheduled and unscheduled, before hospital discharge in this case, for the short term. But if you were seeking long-term care before signing a contract for long-term care services, contact the ombudsman serving that facility to get a sense as to how effective and how timely are the services that support the rehab services that you will need to fully recover. For example, it doesn't make sense for you to go to a facility that has an excellent set of skilled rehabilitation specialists if you can't get out of bed in the morning because there isn't enough staffing on the nursing facility side to get you up, cleaned, fed, dressed, and ready to engage in that fantastic rehabilitation. So talk to an ombudsman to make sure that if that is ultimately your best or only option, that you are making the best possible choice within your geographic area. Let's talk a little bit more, as promised, about memory care units and memory care standalone facilities. As I mentioned, both assisted living facilities, the ALFs, and the nursing facilities, or nursing homes, again, if you prefer the term, that's great, are going to have secure memory care units, in which ultimately you're going to have staff there not only to go ahead and to make sure that activities of daily living are going to be attended to consistently and properly, but that residents are going to remain safe and acclimated as much as possible based on their specific needs, which probably is related most directly to their stage of cognitive decline. Standalone memory care facilities do exist, but they are exclusively, at least in this county, assisted living facilities. Why is this important? Because assisted living facilities don't take Medicaid. They will barely accept you for Medicare for skilled services in the short term. That's usually, as I said, nursing facility level care, as opposed to the inpatient rehab facilities and the long-term acute care facilities that I encourage you to consider instead if they are available. So remember that we are talking about a self-pay option here, unless you are blessed with keeping up with your long-term care insurance, for example, in which case you may see some or all of that monthly cost covered as you continue to pay your premiums, and they begin to go ahead and to pay out directly to the facility for the monthly cost. And those costs continue to go up. When we're talking about skilled, experienced staff, recruitment and retention, it's going to require a higher monthly cost for those utilizing those services. So the average in our county starts at $5,500 a month, with increases based on individual needs. Something to keep in mind. I want to talk for a second about the personal care home model that some of you may already be familiar with and others may have just heard of in passing, and a few who may have no idea what I'm talking about, which is great. We're glad you're here to get some basic information. If you decide tomorrow that you want to go ahead and provide shelter, meals, supervision, assistance with activities of daily living to people for a particular price, and you set up 1, 2, or 3 beds in your home, you can put out a shingle. There are some regulations that you need to go ahead and be cognizant of, but you can go ahead and say, I now run a personal care home. You might be really good at it. You might be really skilled at it in terms of your professional and personal background. But you will, who are, I should say, the clients who will be coming to you, need to know that they are essentially entering a landlord-tenant relationship in which they don't really have the same kind of resident right protections that they might have in a licensed facility, which is typically 4 or more beds in a personal care home model, let alone in the larger box model of assisted living facilities and certainly all nursing facilities. Now, those resident rights are pretty robust here in Texas. For assisted living facilities, they sadly don't include extra protection against involuntary discharge. There, you are also limited in terms of how you are treated, basically the same as the landlord-tenant relationship I mentioned a few moments ago. But your stay unless or until that challenge arises, comes in a licensed assisted living facility with a much more robust set of rights. And in a nursing facility, those rights are even greater, and that includes defense against involuntary discharge, which a long-term care ombudsman is uniquely suited to assist you in defending against, should that situation ever arise. There are personal care home models, whether licensed or unlicensed, that are absolutely superb, but you are going to need to go hunting down on your own with word of mouth advice and whatever you may find online, those that are unlicensed. The licensed ones can be talked about because they are being visited by long-term care ombudsmen, because they are 4 or more beds equals licensed facility. And if it's a licensed long-term care facility, a long-term care ombudsman is paying a visit. So the same model as I said before: scheduled visit, unscheduled visit, talk to the ombudsman assigned to that facility to get a sense as to how consistent the care they're promising is being delivered. We talked a little bit about this already, but it's worth reviewing. After you've evaluated your needs, talked to friends, done research, and here I did want to make sure that you have the Medicare nursing home compare piece. Unfortunately, there's just not that much that's out there that's current when it comes to assisted living facility comparison. They are not measured at the federal level. So if you go to Texas Health and Human Services, for example, and you want to do assisted living facility comparison, you can Google that. You'll get a site, and you're going to find that maybe a few of those sites have been recently surveyed, and others, there's no data for a year or longer. That's why, regardless of how timely the data is on the screen, we want you to visit with or without appointments. We want you to use all your senses, especially sight and smell, to make sure that you get a sense that this is a place that is regularly being cleaned because the people and surroundings are being attended to regularly, and to consult a long-term care ombudsman. Now, they're going to share with you what I'm going to share with you as well. Every licensed long-term care facility is required to have available what is called a survey book. Long-term care facilities are the subject to routine annual inspection and inspection following reported incidents by the long-term care regulatory arm of Texas Health and Human Services. And whatever the outcome of that is, they need to have a survey book that, in reverse chronological order from most recent and working backwards in time, has the documentation of those investigations in said book. They are required by law to go ahead and to provide that for you. Most leave it right in their foyer for people just to look at their leisure throughout their tour. But if it's not there, you absolutely have the right to ask for it. And if they don't produce it, talk to an ombudsman, because that's a no-no. And ultimately, a long-term regulatory complaint can be filed if they're not being transparent about providing information about what surveys, scheduled and unscheduled, have occurred and what the results have been, not just in terms of remedying an individual situation, but have they been subject to fines? Are the issues that have been tagged related to the big 3 concerns of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation? All of this is going to impact your decision-making. It may be that a place, for example, is 5 minutes from your home, but it is red flagged all over the place. And there's a place 15 minutes from your home that has got a very slim survey book because everything's been routine and they're doing everything as right as possible to the best of their ability. There's no perfect facility, but they fall into the category of, we are consistently doing our best. Which one are you going to pick? You're going to need to decide based on all the information available. Now, regardless of how well regarded a facility is, you may run into issues as you or your loved one find themselves in that facility, whether it is for short-term rehabilitation or IV antibiotic therapy in a nursing facility's skilled wing, or if it is long-term care in a licensed nursing facility or long-term care facility. So I want you to be aware of how to reach out. First and foremost, I want you to know the name Gregory Shelley, Greg for short. Greg is what's known as the MLO, the Managing Local Ombudsman for Harris County's Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. The surrounding counties also have a long-term care ombudsman program that serves the various counties on both a professional and volunteer level, just as Harris County is served by a managing local ombudsman, staff ombudsman, professional staff, and dozens and dozens of certified volunteer ombudsmen. And talk to Greg, who in turn will connect you if you are looking for a facility with the ombudsman who serves that facility. If you are looking for a remedy for a situation, we'll connect you with the ombudsman serving that facility to decide what the best pathway is to achieve that. It could be through giving resident permission or proxy permission, if the resident can't speak for themselves, to the ombudsman to go ahead and to act as they see fit informally with administration and clinical staff. It may be scheduling a care plan meeting in which the ombudsman, again with consent, is present. Ombudsmen only work with informed consent of residents or their proxies, by the way. It may be that that ombudsman is going to help you draft a complaint to Texas Health and Human Services, which you will call in or email in under the second bullet point here, which is the complaint hotline information. That's the long-term care regulatory arm that we're talking about, to get them out there to investigate allegations of abuse and or neglect and or financial exploitation. Skip down to the final bullet point for a moment. We'll come back to the third one in a second. It is, I have found, an excellent opportunity to make use of your state and federal elected officials when it comes to the idea that whether it's ombud services, whether it's long-term care regulatory services from Texas Health and Human Services, that you also contact those representatives and you ask them to put in what is called a legislative inquiry about what you have expressed as your concern. The reason for that is because it bumps you to a higher priority level. Legislative inquiries have to be responded to by the appropriate agency, in this case, either the long-term care ombudsman program or long-term care regulation through Texas Health and Human Services within a certain amount of time. So I haven't included a list of federal elected officials because generally it's the state officials that actually get more traction than the federal officials when contacting these agencies. At least their offices are contacting them with legislative inquiries on your behalf. So if you go to the website that's listed, and it is listed correctly, wrm.capital.texas.gov/home, you can look up, if you don't happen to know, the geographically assigned state elected officials for the facility where you or your loved one has problems or concerns, and indicate to them that you either have filed a complaint with long-term care regulation through Texas Health and Human Services. You may have also, or instead of that, contacted the long-term care ombudsman program, and you'd like a legislative inquiry included with your own concerns that have been reported to said agencies. Now, you may hear from Texas Health and Human Services that if your loved one is in a facility, and let's say they're in a facility, not necessarily long-term, though this has happened, but that they're primarily there for a short-term stay, and that you have a concern about abuse, neglect, financial exploitation. The complaint hotline may say to you, go talk to the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, in other words, and use their abuse hotline. I would go ahead and do it, but I would also encourage you to politely thank whoever emailed you back or was on the phone with you from the Texas Health and Human Services complaint hotline, and call back or email back and get someone else. Because ultimately, regardless of whether you're there short-term or long-term, in a licensed long-term care facility, it is Texas Health and Human Services long-term care regulation that is the responding agency to allegations of abuse, neglect, exploitation, or anything else that you have felt needs to rise to the level of formal complaint. If in fact you are dealing with something outside of the facility, and the key example for this is usually financial exploitation in the long-term side, someone who has been qualified for and is on Medicaid and has been for some time, will pay for their monthly stay in a nursing facility. I'm sorry to say this isn't a program that allows for assisted living facility care, but in a nursing facility, if you reach the financial threshold as well as the medical requirements to allow Medicaid, coupled with your monthly or your loved one's monthly applied income, which is usually their Social Security check or maybe a modest pension, depending on their economic circumstances, to fundamentally cover their monthly stay. And all of a sudden, those Social Security checks stop coming in because the person who's assigned to transfer them in the family, what's known as the representative payee, or rep payee for short, isn't doing it anymore. That's something that the Texas Abuse Hotline, the Department of Family and Protective Services, is going to want to know about, because that person resides outside the facility. You're also going to want to make sure that ultimately the facility is not treating your loved one any differently because there are payment issues in play, because we want to avoid retaliation whenever possible. So let's talk about what to provide in a complaint should it prove necessary. A lot of this is straightforward stuff, but the details matter when you're dealing with the government. So name, address, and phone number, relationship to the person who may be the recipient of abuse, neglect, financial exploitation, and more. Name of the person perhaps involved in abusing or neglecting or exploiting that individual. The name, the address, the phone number of the long-term care provider that is currently caring for that person who may be in trouble. And then the nature of the complaint with as much detail as you can possibly muster, such as the date, the time, the location of the incident, a narrative on the incident, how that resident, that person was affected, if there are witnesses or anyone else with relevant information, their names and how to reach them, if there are audio or video records available, making sure that those are available to the agency you're speaking with as well. I want to say a word on that. It is absolutely lawful, with certain requirements being met, for you or your loved one in a long-term care facility to be recorded, audio and video recording. Facilities may not embrace this and may push back on that. there are certain requirements that do need to be followed that primarily have to do with if you're in a shared living situation, you have a semi-private room, for example, and you need to secure the permission of your loved one's roommate or their proxy if the roommate can't speak for themselves. That's a detail that is easily taken care of. If the facility is making it difficult for you, you contact your long-term care ombudsman, and if necessary, you go ahead and file a complaint with long-term care regulation because the statutes on this are darn clear. I also want to point out that the only consequence of putting in unofficial recording devices, audio, video, is that if they are found, the facility has the right to ask that they be removed. And I will tell you that when you are in a facility that has a privacy curtain for you or your loved one, and the camera that's mounted on the wall isn't capable of piercing that privacy curtain, although it may record sounds, it's a good idea, if you are comfortable considering it, to make sure that some other type of backup recording of audio and video or inside the curtain. It could be a clock, it could be a pen, it could be flowers, it could be a stuffed animal, whatever works for you. And I cannot tell you how many times that information has proven invaluable when it comes to verifying that an abuse or neglect has taken place. Some of you may know that my professional background includes being a long-term care ombudsman on staff with Harris County's program. I continue to serve as a volunteer ombudsman in my spare time, away from the Hope and Healing Center and Institute. And I am a firm believer in using unofficial recording because I have seen time and time again in my tenure as an advocate that rather than the mounted camera, has what's made the difference or has tipped the information threshold over the edge in order to go ahead and to verify that, sadly, abuse or neglect or exploitation of any source has occurred. So go into this being trusting, but also vigilant. And the more you can help yourself with timely information, the better an advocate you can be for yourself or a loved one in a long-term care facility. To wind things up, I mentioned at the very beginning the Harris County Area Agency on Aging, the Harris County Aging and Disability Resource Centers. So I wanted to make sure you saw those included here. In one of the previous slides, I gave you the information about how to reach out to Harris County's long-term care ombudsman program. But if you go to the National Consumer Voice, which is the fourth bullet point that's listed on this slide, and you go down to the bottom of their page, you will find a link that says, find a long-term care ombudsman. And again, every county and territory has ombudsmen serving for all the reasons I've mentioned already today. The other bullet points on this resource page are just some good, solid, timely background information about communication with loved ones, about when the need might exist and how to talk about that need for relocation from home into a long-term care setting. In this case, the stories happen to discuss assisted living as the setting, but I think it applies to all the settings we've talked about. And Genworth has a generally well-updated cost of care survey to give you a ballpark range, although again, every institution should be absolutely transparent in their pricing, not just in terms of what's covered in their base monthly rate, but also the a la carte options, depending on how to customize a stay, short or long term, for you or your loved one in a licensed facility. If it's an unlicensed facility, one of those 3 beds or less personal care home models, you're going to need to do that negotiation on your own. If you need further assistance above and beyond the agencies that we've described, whether it's just emotional support, whether it's spiritual support, whether it's a safe place to vent, whether it's a reality check on what those agencies are sharing with you, you are always welcome to reach out to either or both Peggy and or me. And we will schedule appointments with you by phone, by video, and certainly in person. It all depends on what you are most comfortable with. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to just take these last couple of minutes to go ahead and see if anything came up. I don't see anything in the chat, but if anything came up in the presentation that I can answer briefly for you. If so, great, bring it on. If you have a scenario or a situation that you are currently navigating that needs more time, please, please, please call or email us and we'll schedule a meeting, an individual consultation with you. Also, I wanted to make sure that you actually saw my face once during this presentation, those of you watching live or watching this at your leisure. Well, thank you very much, Beverly. I appreciate the compliment. Seeing no questions at this time, and again, the offer is open to reach out to us at any time. You are going to get these slides. You're going to get a link to the recording. Ultimately, as far as unofficial monitoring devices, let's talk, Donna, offline, because ultimately there are tons of different consumer sites that are devoted to unofficial surveillance. And while we can't recommend any of them, we can certainly go ahead and point you in hopefully a good direction in terms of your search parameters. But we can talk offline if you would like, and decide what might work best in your particular situation that you may be facing. I want to thank everybody for their time. If you haven't gone ahead and registered for our final session, you can just go to our website again, hhci.org. You'll find our contact information there. Under the events tab, you will go ahead and find how to sign up for our final session, which again is paying for aging. And we hope to see you for our final session next week. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Reach out to us as needed. You take care.